Clerk, can you please call the roll?
Alderman Moore. Alderman Cone.
Present.
Alderwoman Murphy. Alderman Bosley. Alderman Narayan.
Present.
Alderman Todd.
Present.
Chair Lady Hubbard.
Present.
4 present, you have quorum.
Okay, so at this time, we have a lot of bills, so we'll go, in order of seniority, so we'll hear Board Bill 122, Alderman Vollmer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, thank you for your time. Are we doing 122 first, I believe? I have 2. Here's handouts, Sharita. This is 5223 Botanical, Board Bill 122. It's a existing house that was purchased for $119,000. The developer will be putting $120,000 into it. It's a gut rehab, and with an addition, it's 1,300 square foot. He'll be putting 1,300 square foot onto it, making a 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath, putting a 2-car detached garage. It will be owner-occupied by Mr. Brett Gordon. This is on the map at 5 years of 50%, and that is what we're requesting. This is on Botanical Avenue, 5200, which is on the hill, which is in between Marconi and Edwards Avenue. Up there around Favazza's restaurant. I usually find it easier to tell people where the restaurants are and they know where the streets are at on the hill. I'm open to any questions.
Okay, at this time, we'll take any questions or comments from the committee. Alderman Cone.
Thank you, Alderman, for joining us this morning. So you and I had a conversation offline, and I just wanted to reiterate, ask those questions again, if you're okay with that.
Sure, it's fine.
Just so that the public has an idea of what's being asked and granted here. So these properties are currently not occupied or
No,
under
they are not.
construction? Are
They are all currently under construction. Yes, that is true.
Okay.
There's might be not this particular one or the other ones might be close to completion, but these actually went through LCRA quite some time ago. We haven't had a meeting of the committee here, so.
That was going to be my next question. Do you remember the time frame that you?
These actually went through LCRA probably last spring, if I remember correctly, and have been going on. So naturally, you don't want to tell them not to work till we have a hearing. So
Right. Yeah, things move kind of slow in the city.
Even on the notes here, the construction is to extend through the fall and winter season here on this particular one, 122. But this is one of those small bungalow houses, which back in that particular one built probably in the late 40s, when you had 8 people living in a 4-room house. Now you need 4 people living in 16-room houses. They just don't like to pile on top of each other like we used to. When I used to. My wife, when we moved in together, she said, don't you know how to make a bed? I said, yeah, it's a sofa. I pull it out and I pull it back in. That's how I make it. I thought everybody did that, but now everybody gets their own bedroom, their own garage, their own car.
And this is supported by the market value analysis for a 5-year 50%.
Yeah, it's on the map of residential property developments under $1 million. It was developed. The gentleman saw that map, and that's one of the reasons he requested this.
Okay. And again, this is an owner-occupied
Yes, correct.
redevelopment?
Yes, not for resale. No, this is, Mr. Gordon is going to be the resident there.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's all the questions that I have.
Alderman Narayan.
Yes, thank you. Just one question. So construction has already started on.
Yes, it has. Again,
but
yeah.
the only reason that construction was started was due to this committee not holding.
Yeah, again, it passed through LCRA quite some time ago, but I can't believe you've had a meeting since last.
No, we haven't.
You have not. So the projects might, must go on.
Sure. All right, I have nothing further. Thank you.
Thank you.
Alderman Todd. Okay. Thank you for definitely bringing this forward. I'll just be open and transparent about us not having a meeting. We're stretched so thin down here with these committee hearings, so I'm one of those committee chairs that believes in stacking committee up with a lot of bills opposed to us, coming down here on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So if that was a concern for anybody, that was the delay, and that's my rationale.
No concern for me. As long as the committee is aware of it, then we're fine.
Okay, and, good project. So I guess I'll entertain a motion.
I make a motion that we pass Board Bill 122 out with a due pass recommendation.
Second. Madam Clerk, can you call the roll?
Alderman Moore, Alderman Cone,
Aye.
Alderwoman Murphy, Alderman Bosley, Alderman Narayan,
Aye.
Alderman Todd,
Aye.
Chairwoman Hubbard.
Aye.
4 aye votes.
Okay, Board Bill 122 is out. Next, we'll hear Board Bill 123.
All right, Sharita, here are the handouts. Board Bill 123 has 2 properties being done by the Pagano Land Development Corporation, LLC. There are 2, and as you'll see, they are, again, under construction. They are not occupied, they are not completed, but they are, the frames and the siding and the windows are in on the one, and the other one, again, these went through almost the same time as the other one we talked about before. But these, the 5476 Dempsey and 5027 Daggett are the 2 addresses. The 5027 Daggett will be, it's right down near Ragazzi's Restaurant. Actually, it's across the street from the very large 12-acre development going through that Draper and Kramer's doing with the 58 new homes and the apartment building and the condominium building. This is actually right across the street from that. This was a house that was there before, was probably built pre-World War I. It was uninhabitable, it was torn down, purchased, and they've put this nice 2-story at the Daggett address, of which they bought it for $83,000. As you can see, the construction cost is $485 plus, 2,500 plus square feet with a 1-car garage. They're going to put an in-ground pool in back. I know that's not in yet. And this is, again, on the abatement map at 5 at 50, and that's all they're requesting. The Dempsey address, again, purchased for $130,000. Again, the construction cost $485 plus, almost 1,900 square feet, 2-car detached garage, 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath, and this is again going through as it is on the map at 5 years at 50%. And again, I'll entertain any question. Yes.
The board bill is at 5 at 40 because of the sales price.
I'm sorry.
The map says 5 at 50, but
Huh?
the board bill's 5 at 40%.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The sales price is higher.
Okay, on this, the Dempsey, all right.
Okay, so at this time, we'll take questions from the committee. Alderman Cone.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So this board bill, I do have a few concerns now that I've got the material from SLDC. The photo that SLDC has included on the exhibit here actually indicates that one of these properties has already sold.
Well, yeah, it was sold actually before it was actually built.
So-
It was actually a gentleman, he lived in the neighborhood at another house, unfortunately had a family dispute. They sold their property, he was living in an apartment, and when he found out this lot was available, and he saw that Ms. Pagano had it, these are actually is kind of his design of a house. He purchased it before it was his design. So it was sold before ground was even broke.
But so the building permits that are online indicate that the construction of this started last year. And there's several permits that were issued throughout the first half of the year, and then none were issued until October. And it just says single-family permit, which leads me to believe that that was probably an occupancy permit. It doesn't exactly spell that out here.
It is not an OP. I can tell you that no one's living there. I know the gentleman is actually, he's the leader of the band Dr. Shivagas. And I believe they're still doing the backyard construction. It's torn up. A lot of things held that up because of the development across the street from it. There was a lot of hangups as far as getting things done around there because of the demolition and what was going on across the street with the 12-acre development by Draper and Kramer. This is right across the street, so there was a big downtime. I believe there was a money issue for a while where construction stopped also.
May I inquire of SLDC?
Sure.
Dale, Do you mind taking the hot seat? Dale, do you all check occupancy permits before these come to committee?
Well, occupancy permits, I mean, it's obvious if a building is occupied or not, so I don't know occupancy permit.
Do you?
I mean,
then-
when
do you
this went
drive
through
by that-
LCRA,
If it's obvious to see if a building is occupied, do you then drive by, if you're not checking occupancy permits, are you driving by each one of these before they come to committee?
Well, we drive by them before they go to the LCRA. Now, I don't know that we drive by them again before they come to committee.
So can you,
Do you feel that's important?
well, only because past practice is that if these have been occupied, that they go to the HUD's committee versus the Neighborhood Development Committee. So at what point do these need to be occupied before they go to HUD's? Is that upon introduction? Is
Well,
that
yeah,
upon
it wouldn't
review
be
from
by the time we have a
LCRA?
committee, it would be when it goes through LCRA, and usually it's introduced shortly thereafter, and then it's assigned to a committee. And at that point, clearly, this property wasn't occupied. Now,
So
months
that's
have
not
gone
always
by.
the
If it
case.
becomes occupied in the process, I mean, I don't know what your position might want to be. These aren't rules that we set up, they're rules that the Board of Aldermen set up. So would you ask the president to switch it over to a different committee if it becomes occupied during those months interval? I mean, I don't know what your rules may be, so I have no idea what the rule might be on that, or if there even is a rule, but...
There isn't a rule. I can tell you that. There's nothing in any of our rules about that particular caveat as it relates to
I mean, I
board bills
guess you
for
could take it up with the
redevelopment.
president if you want to establish some kind of a rule then.
Dale, I guess, so the process, as I understand it, these go through LCRA,
Right,
they go through planning,
right,
they come to the Board of Aldermen.
right.
You have a backroom understanding, and I learned this during my chairmanship of this committee, where as long as it gets passed out from LCRA before it gets passed out from committee, you all can finagle whatever you want behind the scenes in terms of when this gets approved. So I'm concerned, at what point is SLDC checking and verifying occupancy of these properties before it comes to this committee?
Well, they're checking it as it goes to the LCRA board. I don't know that there's any checking.
And how are they doing that? Is that with an
Oh, they actually
occupancy
go by
permit? Or they
go
just,
by the property.
and they knock on the door and see if someone's home?
Well, I guess if there's a real question as to whether it's occupied or not, we would do that. But in almost all cases, it's obvious if the building doesn't have a roof on it or whatever it is, that it's certainly not occupied.
Okay, thank you. You know, I appreciate that these are, you know, redevelopments in your area, Alderman. I also, the exhibit says that the abatement map supports these at 5 years for 50%, and the summary of the board bill says that you're only supporting 5 years at 40%. Is that correct?
That's on the Dempsey property only, as I was unfarmed by Zach, is that correct?
I can explain.
Yeah.
Okay, you want to explain that?
Dale, Matt Bauer, SLDC. So when we passed the map resolution, there was I guess an amendment added that if it was over, I think 10% above the, like the mortgage, mortgage act, that we would reduce the abatement by an appropriate amount, equivalent to the amount it was over that, like $400,000 range. So in two of these cases, so this one being one of them, it was over that threshold, so we adjusted the abatement down by the appropriate amount to adjust for the amount that it was over. So that's why the abatement is below what the map recommends.
So the board bill summary says that these are 5 years at 40%, but that's not the case.
No,
That's
that
only
is-
applicable for one of the properties?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right, thank you. I have no further questions.
Alderman Narayan.
I have nothing at this time. Thank you.
I don't have anything.
Okay. I'll offer a comment. I definitely support the project and I support your efforts and I wish that I had, homes of this level in my ward at this price. I was looking at this, I started getting Twitter notifications about this at like 6 o'clock this morning of people griping as usual, and I said it there and I'll say it publicly here. However, we can offer incentives to help redevelop these neighborhoods. I'm in support of that, and what makes us feel better about it is we have a map that we're using now, and it is kind of, making us make some equitable decisions across the board based on what the need is. So I commend your efforts, and at this time, I'll entertain a motion for passage of Board Bill 123. Okay, I can make the motion, right? Do we have a second? A second. Thank you. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Moore. Alderman Cone.
Present.
Alderwoman Murphy. Alderman Bosley. Alderman Narayan.
No.
Alderman Todd.
Yes.
Alderwoman Hubbard.
Aye.
1 present, 2 aye votes, and 1 no vote. I don't think it passed. No, it didn't pass.
So what are the rules regarding that? Who
I
could
can
take-
go get it.
There's Alderman Kenny.
You need someone in the affirmative
Okay, and so what do we,
on the prevailing side.
on the prevailing side, what's the prevailing side?
It would be either myself or Brad.
Hold on, we can read it, get the rules. So, I almost said Alderman Kennedy, 2 and 2, and so we're getting a lesson on the rules here. So what, what can we, how do we bring it back, or how do we hold it, or what can we do?
Yeah.
Pardon me?
You need a motion to reconsider the vote by someone who voted on the prevailing side.
And what's the prevailing side? Okay, so.
Anyone can make it.
Okay, so I would like to, make a motion to reconsider,
Voted on
Board
the
Bill
prevailing side, right.
123, and I guess, would you like to hold it in committee?
If that's the case, certainly.
We need a second, yeah. We need a second.
We need a second, Mr. Todd.
Alderman Moore. Alderman Cone.
Present.
Alderwoman Murphy. Alderman Bosley. Alderman Narayan.
Aye.
Alderman Todd. Chairwoman Hubbard.
Aye.
1 present and 3 aye votes.
Okay, and so, you want to just hold the,
I guess I have no other choice at this point. Just like to remind the committee, our most important job here is to keep people living in the city of St. Louis. Thank you very much.
thank you, and I'll definitely be willing to hold another hearing for you, Alderman Vollmer. Okay, so at this time, we'll bring forth.
Alderman Cohn's question and all, clearly, if we don't have another meeting, which we probably won't have until February, the probability of this being an occupied building at that point is pretty strong. So just so you're aware of that.
Well, Dale, I'm willing to have another meeting, but I guess if we have another meeting, then, based on the rules to get it out timely before we go down, how will that work? Will we have enough time to?
Oh, you don't go down until March, so you definitely have another meeting before you go down.
If we have it in like January.
It'll definitely
then
be
we'll
occupied.
probably- Right.
Okay,
Yeah, I would think, if it's that close now, yeah.
okay, thank you. So, at this time, we'll hear, Board Bill 63, Alderwoman Ingrassia.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee. Board Bill 63 is a redevelopment project at 2612 Ann in Fox Park. The 26 and 2700 blocks of Ann and Allen in Fox Park, while there are a number of wonderful families that have both been living there for a very long time and are newer to the neighborhood, I like your name plaque. I just noticed your name plaque.
Oh.
Did someone, is that a joke? Okay, do you know what it says?
I thought you did that. I'm kind of a big deal. I really am. Who did that?
I'm sorry,
Is this a prank?
that distracted me. I like it. I think you should keep it up
You
there.
got me, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I couldn't not say anything.
You're trying to give me ostracized.
That sounds definitely like, don't let them have your phone without a passcode on it. That's happened to me before.
Okay.
At any rate, Board Bill 63 is a redevelopment project by a rehabber who does projects on his own. He's going to be renovating a two-family for him to live in, and he's going to rent out the other unit. We are asking for 5 years at 50%, and I think just to note, I did not realize this could happen, but when he bought the property, the taxes were about $113 a year. And then when he closed, the assessor realized that their supervisor had made a mistake and the property was actually valued at $2,700 a year. And so even though they make a mistake, they won't allow the property to continue being taxed incorrectly. So this gentleman did think that he would be paying $113 a year for property taxes, and it went up to $2,700. So just another kind of interesting factor. I'm happy to take questions.
Alderman Cone.
Run that by me again. So the property was being assessed at 113?
Correct. It was being assessed incorrectly by a supervisor who is no longer with the city.
Okay, good. I mean, that's an exceptionally unfortunate situation. I mean, not that I would think that anyone logically could think that their property would be assessed at $113 in that neighborhood, but still, that would continue either in our assessor's office or or collector's office. I'm glad to hear that it's been remedied at this point. So the assessment went up to $2,700 a year.
That's correct. And I mean, that's just a contributing factor, but he is also renovating a building that's been vacant for quite some time for himself to live in, and then he'll be renting it out. We've had some struggles getting those blocks closest to Jefferson redeveloped, and so we're happy to have him in the neighborhood.
So is he doing the work himself?
Some of
Or-
it, yes. Most of it he's doing himself.
Is he, so is Stephen Haskins the developer, and he'll be
The owner.
owner occupying it as well?
Correct.
Okay, I don't have any further questions, thank you.
Alderman Naraya.
Thank you. So this is owner occupied, and I'm looking at the total value of this abatement, just over $2,600. Does this project happen without this abatement?
I think that he would probably stay, but he is definitely on a fixed income. And I mentioned exacerbated by the fact that his property taxes are quite a bit higher than he originally suspected. It's in an area that fits in with the MVA and that has seen quite a struggle in terms of redevelopment.
So in terms of kind of what's, I don't have a great idea of what's kind of directly surrounding this particular parcel. Can you give me kind of a feel of what's happening on that street?
Sure. So it's just a couple of 100 feet off Jefferson Avenue. Southside Early Childhood Center renovated a building across the street recently. But other than that, it's kind of hodgepodge of whether or not there's been redevelopment. There's a ton of vacant buildings that have been vacant for a number of years, and then some small businesses. And the 2,600 and 2,700 blocks of most of Fox Park are still struggling.
And in your estimation, this could help get a toehold of development on that block?
Absolutely. And again, it's somebody who wants to live in the city who's planning on rehabbing other properties and then renting out to other people who are interested in living in Fox Park.
All right, thank you. I have nothing further.
Alderman Todd? And I don't have any questions, so I'll
I make a motion that we pass Board Bill 63 out with a do pass recommendation.
Alderman Moore, Alderman Cone,
Aye.
Alderwoman Murphy, Alderman Bosley, Alderman Narayan,
Aye.
Alderman Todd,
Aye.
Chairwoman Hubbard.
Aye.
4 aye votes.
And so at this time, we have another bill, Board Bill 142, Alderwoman Ingrassia.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Board Bill 142 is a redevelopment project at 2633 Allen Avenue. It's been vacant since at least 2007, was originally owned by LRA for being sold for back taxes for an absentee owner, and then has been purchased a couple of different times by developers who just never moved forward with any project. As I mentioned, on Board Bill 63, there's been a real challenge in getting the 2,600 blocks of Fox Park, especially right in that area surrounding Russell, redeveloped. And I think that these two pictures don't actually do justice how this property actually looks today. I think the Google map pictures are updated. It's a mess. And we're trying very hard to create a block in an area in Fox Park that maintains its affordable housing and also has properties for people who are interested in moving in the neighborhood and want more space. So this will become a 2,300 square foot, 3-bedroom, 2.5 bath home. It qualified for 5 years of tax abatement at 50% with a value of about $7,000. I've worked with this developer before in Lafayette Square and a couple of other neighborhoods, and his work is of high quality, and I am excited that we are able to move this project forward at this time. Happy to take questions.
Alderman Cone.
No questions.
Alderman Narayan.
Just kind of, excuse me, just some of the same questions that I had previously. This particular parcel, I just looked at the Google image, and it does look like it's been allowed to fall into disrepair. The rest of the block surrounding it, what's kind of the feel of that block?
It's similar. It's half properties that are affordable rental properties and maybe 3 rehabbed projects, and then everything else is empty, vacant, in similar shape.
And in your estimation, this project would not move forward without these abatements?
That's right.
All right, thank you. I have nothing further.
Okay, Alderman Todd.
I don't have any questions.
Okay. I have no questions, and I'll entertain a motion.
I make a motion that we pass Board Bill 142 out with a do pass recommendation. Previous roll.
Hearing no objection to previous roll, Board Bill 142 is out with a due pass recommendation.
Thank you.
Okay, is anyone here for Alderman Roddy's bills?
Well, yes, and the developer is here. I don't know about Alderman Roddy.
Does he want it done? I mean,
Oh, yeah, no question
oh, okay.
about that.
Okay, if you'll do it, Alderwoman, I'd appreciate it. He has 118,
161 and 162.
161, and 162.
You better not be getting me into trouble, Dale.
Oh, no, these are all good projects.
Oh, he is.
The first one, the Sarpy one is,
Okay, Board Bill 118, 3974 Sarpy Avenue is a rehab project of an office space in Forest Park Southeast. The MVA is B. The total net present value of the abatement is $430,978. I have Jonathan Ferry on the financial details And we do have the developer here? No, not on this one, okay. Scores 5 out of 5.
Okay, so, at this time, we'll take comments from the committee. Alderman Cone?
Alderwoman, I would just like to commend you on being a gracious colleague and offering to hear these bills on behalf of the alderman from the 17th Ward when I don't think that he would give you the same courtesy. So I commend you for that. I have been told on numerous occasions this past year that the alderman from the 17th Ward is not going to be offering tax abatement in his ward. So I'm a little curious as to how the conversations have taken place to the point where we're now offering tax abatement for 3 different projects in his ward.
I guess I have Dale Rootstats with SLDC and Jonathan Ferry, if they would like to speak to that.
The information you're stating is something that we have never heard.
I've heard this directly from him. So
Okay, well, I have not heard directly from him.
Okay.
You know, so I don't know how to react to that because we've never told. Now, there may be he's not going to do any more tax abatement. And then there's more to that sentence for single-family houses, for, I don't know, you know, but a flat statement that he's not going to do any tax abatement, I have not heard that statement.
So, with all due respect to Alderman Roddy, who's not here, and I haven't contacted him, why don't we just hold the bills and just wait until
Yeah, I would like
he
to
can
hear
come
from
before the
him.
committee
makes
so we can
sense.
hear from him. Okay, but thank you so much for offering to do those in his absence. Okay, so at this time, we'll go to, is anyone here for Alderwoman Spencer?
I can hear hers.
Okay, so,
Can we start with Sam?
Board Bill
Can we
166.
start with Sam?
Okay, well, we're gonna back up some. We're trying to get some things done. We're gonna hear, Alderman Moore's bill, which is Board Bill
125.
125. Where's it at? Oh, it's right in the stack.
Yeah, I wasn't really comfortable with that after Shane said that. I was like, oh, I don't want to be voting on this. Yeah. Thank you. Actually, thank you, members of the committee, Madam Chairwoman. I've been asked by the alderman of the 4th Ward. He texted me last night asking if I could hear present the board bill for him. This is a board bill that seeks tax abatement for 10 years up to 95% of the assessed value, or I'm sorry, for 95%, followed by 5 years of tax abatement based on 50% of the assessed value. This is a multi-site development taking place in the 4th Ward in the Vandeventer neighborhood.
So Alderman Narayan.
Thank you. And I realize that this isn't your bill, so you might not be as familiar with it. So if you don't know the answer to
I
anything.
am actually fairly familiar with the area and with the development. This is a site within the 4th Ward that the alderman has been actively working to redevelop, and he's been partnering with Rankin. as
Okay,
the
then I am
developer.
familiar with the
Yeah.
area. And so are these homes similar to the other homes right there in the
They
area?
will be. Yeah,
Okay.
they're single-family homes being constructed in the area.
Perfect. All right, well, I don't have anything further then.
Okay.
Alderman, Todd. I don't have any questions. Okay, so I have a few questions, so I was doing stuff, explain to me this, again, I've never seen this, no acquisition cost, no accent price, how is it structured again?
So my understanding is that most of this is vacant property that's in the 4th Ward already that was owned by LRA,
Okay.
and that there was a transfer from LRA for the property. So if there is acquisition costs, it's minimal.
Okay, and they will be owned by Rankin. Okay. I'm familiar with this now. Okay, so, at this time, I'll entertain a motion for passage of Board Bill 125.
I make a motion that we pass Board Bill 125.
Second.
Madam Clerk, can you call the roll?
Alderman Moore, Alderman Cone,
Aye.
Alderwoman Murphy, Alderman Bosley, Alderman Narayan,
Aye.
Alderman Todd,
Aye.
Chairwoman Hubbard.
Aye.
4 aye votes.
Okay, Board Bill 125 is out with a, do pass recommendation, and in Alderwoman Spencer's absence, I'll just hold her bills.
She's actually she's on her way up.
Oh, she
I was
is?
going to
Okay.
present them,
Okay,
but.
so, at this time, let's see. Alderman Todd, would you like to present your Board Bill 144?
I would like to table my Board Bill because we want to redo it. How do I do that?
I don't table it.
We just won't hear
developer.
it today.
Yeah,
Okay, so Alderman Ryan, we can, take your bill next.
Oh, Matt Bauer, just to explain Alderman Todd's tabling, the developers.
Not tabling.
Oh,
He's not tabling,
Sorry.
we're just not going.
Oh, okay.
Hear it right now. Okay. So, Board Bill 87.
Thank you, Ms. Chairwoman. I'm Alderman Brett Narayan from the 24th Ward. We have Board Bill 87 in front of this committee today, which is a redevelopment of a former school in the 24th Ward, Wilkinson School. It's going to be developed into 34 apartment units, 2 studios, 26 one-bedrooms, 6 two-bedrooms. It'll have 60 parking spots, which is something that the neighborhood was quite concerned about. This developer has been very good at working with the neighborhood association to alleviate concerns regarding this particular development, the density of it, the parking issues. There was an issue regarding basically which direction the front of this building would be facing. As you can see, it's Arsenal. Actually, the front of the building now will be Canterbury, which was something that the developer was willing to kind of shift everything in order to make the neighborhood happier with the project. It has full support of the Ellendale Neighborhood Association. It has my support. This is the 3rd time that a developer has moved on this, and then the previous 2 times did not result in the project coming to completion. The SLDC has recommended 10 years at 80% on this. I think that that's what it's going to take to get this actually developed. This school has been sitting here empty for many years in the middle of a residential neighborhood. It's turning into an eyesore at this point, and the local residents are concerned about having such a large vacant building right in the middle of the neighborhood. As I'm sure that all of you are aware, nothing great tends to happen in vacant buildings. And I think that this is a fantastic project. The developer has been great about working with the neighborhood association. He's planned a community garden there. He's relocating his business actually into this, so there's actually jobs associated with this as well. There's 17 jobs, 2 of which will be new jobs. And I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone may have.
Alderman Cone.
Thank you, Alderman. Thank you, Madam Chair. So this looks like it's just purely residential, correct? There's no...
There is some office space associated with it as well. I believe, and.
Is that for like the management company, or is
So
that?
there's a construction it's the construction company who is actually doing this project. They're relocating their corporate office, if you will, to this location. So they'll be storing equipment there and having office space there as well.
Okay. And are there other tax credits that are being used in conjunction with the redevelopment?
I believe that there are state tax credits, which we don't have a decision on yet. If my yes. Yeah, whatever this is.
Dave Sweeney with Advantage Development. They'll be seeking state and state and federal historic tax credits. They have not ascertained the state credits at this point. They hope to. They are relocating to the gymnasium part of that, so it will be a mixed-use project. This will be their third school in the St. Louis city that they've done the project for. And they're at full, so they do both the construction and the development and the management. Alderman, to your question on what kind of service they do full service there.
Okay.
They maintain them.
Okay. 5.6 million seems rather low for a rehab and repurpose of a school and a residential. I presume that's because they're doing the work themselves.
Yeah, they follow all procedures, the MBWB and everything else, but they are able to do costs, and then they know the footprints of schools, and this is a smaller one compared to the other two they've done,
Yeah.
as number of units go. So they have it down to a certain extent. They had one in the Shaw neighborhood and one in the Soulard neighborhood currently.
Okay. I don't have any other questions. Thank you.
Alderman Todd.
I don't have any questions.
Okay, I have a few questions. So you said this property, they did apply for state and federal historic tax credits?
That's my understanding.
That's correct, yes.
And will there be any affordable units here, or is it all market rate? What's the average rent on one of the units?
Do we have that? I think it's right around, it's on the lower end of market rate, $1.40 to $1.50. So they're not at affordable per se, but there are some smaller units that are at that rate. It's a lot of first-time renters is kind of the market they go to, that come into the city, and then often they'll buy in the city after renting here. So they have a pretty good track record there.
And how long has this school been vacant?
At least 5 years, maybe 10 at the most, but I'm not for sure, but at least 5 years, I can say confidently.
Yeah, more than 5 years, and there've been at least two previous attempts to, at least 5 years, and there's been two previous attempts to redevelop it, and ultimately, as a result of a lack of incentivization, the developers ended up walking away from it. So I'm a big proponent of kind of the but-for test, looking at incentives, and I don't frequently bring TIFs, but I firmly believe that this would not happen without some incentivization here.
Okay, thank you, and I'm glad that you were open to it on this particular project. I know in my ward I have a school that we're trying to do the same, and I think that's a good thing for the city, and we can redevelop some of these schools. And I know it can be very challenging, like they're historic, and so you can't change certain things. One of the projects in my ward, like you can't change the lockers in, and so the developers have to be very creative in how they do that, and I think it's a good way for us to add housing stock to the city. So thank you for believing in this project. So at this time, I'll entertain a motion.
Can I actually ask?
Hold
So,
on one second.
Well, you can't second, there's no motion yet, but, so just to be clear, there's no TIF associated with this, it's just a tax abatement.
Excuse me, yes, it's an abatement, not a
Yeah,
TIF.
and so,
Excuse me.
the board bill says that this is 10 years of abatement, up to 80%. How does that fall in line with MVA within the area?
I would defer to Mr. Glass on that.
Rusats.
If we were simply doing a house.
I realize that there are the MVAs for under $1 million, but
Yeah,
what the census tract that this falls.
There wouldn't be tax abatement, I don't think, available in this area if, at least the map wouldn't, there'd have to be other qualifying reasons why the map wouldn't advocate tax abatement in this area for a single-family house.
Okay. So it's a fairly stable part of your ward then?
With the notable exception of this building, I would
Great.
say yes.
Okay. So, it seems like it's a good project, always happy to see these old school buildings being rehabbed. I would say you're awfully fortunate that you've only had it vacant for 5 years and that you've already had 2 attempts at redevelopment, though. Some of us have had buildings. Cass Elementary's been vacant for, I have no idea how many decades, and then certainly the last 20 that I've lived in the city, it's been vacant. Scruggs Elementary on South Grand, although it's been sold, it's completely underutilized at this point and boarded up, and it's been that way for about 10, 15 years now. So, and of course, there's Cleveland High School.
We have been fortunate in the 24th with development.
So at this time, I'll entertain a motion for passage of Board Bill 87.
I make a motion that we pass Board Bill 87 out with a due pass recommendation.
Second.
Madam Clerk, can you call the roll?
Alderman Moore, Alderman Cone,
Aye.
Alderwoman Murphy, Alderman Bosley, Alderman Narayan,
Aye.
Alderman Todd,
Aye.
Chairwoman Hubbard.
Aye.
4 aye votes.
Board Bill 87 is out with a due pass recommendation. Board Bill 166, Alderwoman Spencer.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Did you say Board Bill 166 or Board Bill 167? Do you have a preference?
166.
Board Bill 166. Board Bill 166 is a tax abatement for 3400 Chippewa. It's at the corner of Chippewa and Louisiana. This project is a rehab, and this will be a full gut, not a full gut rehab, but a full, well, they're not going to gut it because one of the remarkable things about what this developer is doing is they are keeping the existing commercial tenants, one of which is a daycare, which serves a large part of this neighborhood here. But they are going to be sort of displacing them within the building to rehab their facility and improve and the existing daycare facility in the building. They're going to be rehabbing the upstairs into new residential units, and then there's a couple of additional commercial units in addition to that daycare. What we're going with here is the recommendation from SLDC for 10 years of tax abatement at 95%. The developer lives in the city just north of here, and this is their, I believe, not their first project, but their first project of this size, but they have other projects under their belt. You know, this is an area of Dutchtown, which, as we know, has some challenges. I'm really looking forward to the increased amount of rehab that we're seeing along Chippewa, and this falls in nicely with some of the other work going on in the community.
At this time, we'll take questions for the committee. Alderman Cone.
Yeah, I was actually just on Chippewa on Sunday, and this is one of my favorite intersections on Chippewa. It's really beautiful.
I'm glad to hear you say that. It's such a remarkable building.
It really is. Actually, there's 2 or 3 on that particular corner that are just really stunning buildings.
Yeah, that's true.
And for those that aren't aware, we're currently working on a Calm Street project along Louisiana from Graveway south to Merrimack. And so to have that plus, complementary redevelopment that'll bring more pedestrian traffic and bicycle traffic and more higher uses for the neighborhood it's wonderful to see that happening. So Renaissance Development Associates, is that Jason Johnson's firm or?
no.
Okay.
Oh, they were? I didn't realize that.
Okay, so who is the developer then?
It's a married couple, I'm blanking on their name right now. Do you have their name?
No, I do not. It's the LLC.
The LLC, the 3809, and they,
Oh, okay.
yeah, they live in Tower Grove East, I believe. They live in a neighborhood maybe less than a mile from here, so they are residents of the city, but not in this building.
Great. Yeah, it's Louisiana and Compton. For those of you that, aren't as familiar with the area, there's a significant number of vacant buildings along those streets and also Chippewa for that matter. So, the beautiful architecture, but there's pretty much a vacant building or bombed out, burned out building at every few houses along that stretch. So, it's nice to see that they're kind of using this as a note of strength and hopefully working outward from there. I don't have any other questions or statements. Thank you.
Alderman DeRyan.
Yeah, just a quick question, and it might be a bit in the weeds here. We were just commenting on the architecture there, and I mean, it's a beautiful building, and as Alderman Cohen pointed out, it really is a beautiful intersection there. Do you know if they plan on keeping kind of that spire and the kind of exterior of the building looking the same, or is this going to be something where they change the building as a whole?
It didn't dawn on me to ask that, but they didn't sound insane. So I wouldn't imagine they would get rid of that beautiful spire. It is absolutely remarkable. So I didn't think to ask that specific question, but they had some roofing issues over the summer/fall, so they were doing some work to repair the roof at that time, and they were not doing they didn't do any damage to any of that upper facade.
Yeah, if I recall correctly, from Sunday, it looked as though there was some new shingles. It's not slate, it's a shingle roof.
Okay.
And it looked like it had been recently either repaired or replaced.
Yeah.
Perfect. That's all I have. Thank you.
Alderman Todd.
I don't have any questions.
I wanted to add one additional, I kind of touched on this earlier, but as we're doing this rehab work, one of the concerns we have is pushing existing residents and businesses out of the neighborhood as we do this. And this developer is committed to keeping the existing businesses in there. And while a daycare may not be the most commercial-friendly business because they're a long-standing business, I think it's important to be committed to keeping those in the existing structures that they've already been in to not disrupt what has been serving the community. And for that, I think it's really remarkable. And I just wanted to mention that.
Absolutely. I have a few questions as well. So will these be affordable units, or what would be the starting rent for these 6 residential units and the 3 commercial units as well?
I don't have that. Because it's, it necessarily would have to be sort of affordable to be marketable in this neighborhood, I would guess, but I don't have that, those exact numbers. Do you have those?
They did not provide that, but like Alderwoman said, for the market rate and for this neighborhood is not very high.
It's not very high?
Yeah.
Okay, well, of course not. I see where it is, and I definitely will support the project, and just like with anything, there's this big backlash on incentives, but I mean, people can spend their money and go develop anywhere, and so when people are believing in our city and they want to bring our city back to its richness, I think it's important that we let SLDC do their job and we offer abatements such as this because, we need it in our community. So I commend you for being open to it and, for definitely just looking at this beautiful building and saying that, something, they need to be offered some type of assistance so that they can move forward with it. So thank you. And I don't have any more comments. I'll entertain a motion.
I make a motion that we pass Board Bill 166 out with a due pass recommendation. Previous roll.
Hearing no objections to previous roll, Board Bill 166 is our do pass recommendation. Board Bill 167.
Board Bill 167 is a tax abatement for a single family home. This is on South Compton, closer to Cherokee Street in the Gravway Park neighborhood. This will be a full rehab for sale. You can see the building is 2,100 square feet. We're looking at 10 years of tax abatement, 95%. And when you flip it over, you can see that the total value of this tax abatement, even though it is covering 10 years, is valued at $15,000. When we're looking at tax abatements in these areas, especially ones like the one we just looked at in this one, these are MVF areas, and so the value of these abatements is fairly low. So this incentive package that we're putting together is not a huge cost to the city because the taxes in this area are fairly depressed today. So that's another remark, kind of a noteworthy aspect of the projects. And really speaks to, as the chairwoman was saying earlier, why they're important to consider.
Alderman Cone,
No questions.
Alderman Narayan,
I have nothing, thank you.
Alderman Todd. I don't have any questions. And I'll entertain a motion for Board Bill 167.
I make a motion that we pass Board Bill 167 out with a do pass recommendation.
Second.
Previous rule.
Hearing no objection to previous roll, Board Bill 167 is out with a do pass recommendation. I see Alderman Roddy has joined us. Alderman Roddy, would you like to hear your bills or? We kind of held them, and we weren't sure if you were coming or not, but if.
I apologize. For some reason, Madam Chairman, I had it down at 10 o'clock on my calendar, so I apologize for my delay in being here.
So we'll hear Board Bill 161.
61.
Or we can do 118.
Okay, 118. Madam Chairwoman, this is for a board bill that is, for a building that has been, I guess I should do this. For a building that has been vacant for, I think, since I was elected, so probably for 30 years or longer. And the proposal is,
We had it before.
this is, I believe it is the Old Rock Springs School. And its acquisition cost is $1.8 million, $4.9 million construction cost, and I believe it's going to be offices, and I guess all the information is there before the committee as far as the financial analysis, which was done by Mr. Faring.
At this time, we'll take questions from the committee. Alderman Cone.
Yeah, good morning, Alderman. So earlier this year, you and I had several conversations about tax abatements and, potential projects in my ward. During those conversations, at one point, you told me that you were getting away from offering tax abatement in your ward for future projects. So I'm curious as to how we're sitting here with 3 board bills that are for tax abatements.
I don't think we were trying to scale back on it, and we passed the resolution, which I believe you
Co-sponsored.
co-sponsored.
Correct.
And in that resolution, we set out guidelines, including a map for low-density development, which I believe we have abided by within my ward. And then these projects, I believe, conform to the formula as established by Mr. Ferry, and, he's here, he'll be glad to discuss it with you. I don't even meet with the developers, I should say I don't meet with them. I meet with them after they meet with Mr. Ferry typically, or I advise them to go see Mr. Ferry to see what or if their project would qualify for incentives.
So, is Wilson here, or Zach? or Dale was having a conversation. So the MVA, I know that this isn't a project, it's over $1 million, but so what is the MVA rating for this particular area?
It's a B, or it's a gray area also, because it's industrial.
There's industrial around it, so, okay. So it wasn't considered in the MVA because of the industrial area to the north of it. But the area to the south is still, I mean, that's, Shodo and south is a lot of residential, so is that where the B would be?
Correct, yes.
Okay. So, I mean, I get a little frustrated by this because I hear, you know, that you want to scale back on incentives, and yet, you know, we've got 3 board bills before us this morning. And, you know, I mean, this one in particular is for 10 years at 90% abatement. I'm just not, what's the rationale behind that? Yeah, I mean, Jonathan, this goes back to, you know, the conversation when I was chair of neighbor development, and SLDC made a recommendation for, I believe it was 10 years at 50% or something like that for a school in North St. Louis that was having almost exactly the amount of investment that's taking place here. And so we ended up revising that bill and going to 15-year tax abatement, but where is the rationale here for this?
I don't recall that one off the top of my head, but the rationale here is...
It was a school off of, I believe, Union. I believe it was Clark Elementary School off of Union. It was in Alderman Frank Williamson's ward at the time.
Okay.
So, and the developer specifically came before this committee and said that they wouldn't be able to make money off of the property for 15 years because of the amount of investment that was required, plus the low rental rates that were, you know, essentially market rate in the neighborhood. Right. But LCRA and SLDC made a recommendation that completely baffled me, and I'm just, I'm trying to reconcile this. How?
I do not remember that recommendation. I can't imagine that we would come to that conclusion because we gave them a lot more abatement than that.
After I specifically asked you all to look at this again. So but where do we get off offering, you know, a 10-year 90% abatement in an area that has seen, I mean, Alderman, how much investment have you had in your ward in the last 5 years? I mean, several $100 million of investment in this neighborhood. I would imagine that this project could happen without the tax abatement at this point.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing that we try to go off of to figure out if tax abatement is necessary is we look at the rate of return to the project, and it's based off of the rents, and it's based off of the total investment that's required in order to get the building stabilized. So in this case, we were showing that the rate of return was 3.2% without incentive and 4.3% with. So even with the incentive, it's below what would normally be considered a market rate, average rate of return. Now, granted, we try to vet the inputs on that as best as possible. So we try to make sure that the rents, for example, that are being put in are consistent with what we would see from market data. You know, we can't, other than, you know, looking at similar projects when trying to compare the cost per square foot, we can't know exactly if the costs that they're submitting to us are 100% accurate. So we try to, you know, judge that by, like I said, similar projects. So based on the inputs that we have, we were showing a very low rate of return, which is what would justify the incentive. And then the second part of it is that even with the incentive, it does generate a fairly significant amount of revenue. So it's those two things sort of in combination.
So I guess that goes back to my question. If this is already going to generate a significant amount of revenue without the incentive, then...
To the city, revenue to the city.
So the numbers that you have here, the rate of return is the rate of return to the city, or to the developer?
Up top, the rate of return is to the developer.
So without incentives, the developer is still going to be receiving a 3.2% investment within 10 years.
Yeah, that's their average annual rate of return. So what that means is that they're getting basically 3.2% of their investment back per year. So if you take 100 and divide it by 3.2, that's how many years it would take them to recover their investment. So that's why generally developers want to see returns somewhere in the 7 to 8, because that means they're getting their return back in about 15 years or less. In this case, 3.2% means it's taking about 30 years or more.
And this is going to be like 100% commercial, or is there residential factored into that?
Well, as you can tell from the fact that it still has the star on here, this one was done quite a while ago. So I don't 100% remember, but I believe it's all office. All office, yeah, it's all office.
So it's 17,500 square feet total,
I believe that's correct. Yep.
and it's office space, so they're not necessarily going to have to redo plumbing, to reconfigure to residential purposes and things of that nature that will add exponentially to costs. But this is half the size of the building that's in the 24th Ward and is cheaper than what they're spending in the 24th Ward, and yet we're giving them more incentives to do it.
Which one is that in the?
This is the school building and the 24th Ward that we just heard.
Which one is that? Oh, Wilkinson. Right. Yeah, so again, the driver there was their rate of return was significantly higher. In fact, their rate of return was, that one we had discussions with the developer because, with the amount of historic tax credit they were getting, technically we thought that it was borderline whether or not it would need the incentive. But because the
which would be
historic tax
borderline?
credit, the Wilkinson one. But the reason why we went with it was because the historic tax credit wasn't guaranteed, and because it's going to take about 3 years probably for them to get it. And so.
Isn't that going to be the case for many of these projects?
That's going to be the case for a lot of projects, yes. I believe, yeah, this one has historic tax credits too, but even with the historic tax credits on this one, it's only making the 3.2, whereas the other one was making like 8, I believe.
Couldn't you argue, though, that that's because they're spending twice as much per square foot on the redevelopment costs of the project versus?
Sure, yeah.
I mean, so they're making this a much nicer facility, which would then increase its value in an area that's already seen several hundreds of millions of dollars of investment.
No, absolutely. The more that they're spending is going to increase.
Reduce their
it's
rate
going
of
to reduce their
return.
rate of return, right. So, again, I don't remember all the details on this one. I think this one had infrastructural stuff, sewer-related stuff that was amping up the cost, but I'm not 100% sure. What is that other one so I can compare? The parcel. Do you have Wilkinson?
It's fair to say that this building is in much, much worse condition than the other property. The other property, though it's been vacant for 5 or 10 years, it doesn't look like this building. So I think the cost per square foot of getting this building up and just sealed and ready to go is much more significant than the Wilkinson property.
I'm glad you recognize that, Dale. I have similar issues in the 25th Ward. My challenge, though, Dale, is more so, we have an area that has seen hundreds of millions of dollars of reinvestment in that community. I've been told that we're trying to phase out the tax abatements in this particular, part of the city, And here we are with 3 bills for tax abatement in this particular part of the city. And this is a project that, you know, is half the size of a project that we just heard about in a adjacent ward in the 24th ward. The 24th and the 17th are adjacent, if I'm not mistaken. One's just to the west of it. This is for office space, so you're not, you know, repurposing it in the same way that you would a, you know, old school building for residential redevelopment, which would increase costs. So I'm at a loss for this particular project. So that concludes my questions.
Alderman Narayan.
I have no questions.
Alderman Todd.
I don't have any questions.
Okay, so with this board bill, Alderman Roddy, just so that we can have some more conversation on it, would you
Sure, Madam Chairman.
be okay if we just
Sure.
held it in, and let's, you know, just talk more about, you know, making sure we're going in the right direction?
Sure, absolutely, Alderwoman.
Okay,
Madam Chairman.
Thank you so much. So, we'll go ahead and hear Board Bill 161 as well, just so that we can definitely hear these bills and get that part over with, and then we can have some discussion at a later time.
Chairwoman, members of the committee, Board Bill number 161 is for a new apartment complex that is scheduled to be constructed on a vacant lot in the Central West End. It too is a very strong area. Actually, unlike the previous project, which isn't exactly in a strong area, it's right along the highway, and there hasn't been as much investment in that portion of the ward. But in this case, this is in the West End. The approach that they took, and again, I wasn't involved in any of the discussions. I sent the developer down to the SLDC, and I believe they negotiated a term of tax abatement, but they had a base level of revenue that provided some assurance. Okay, so this board bill will allow 10-year tax abatement with pilots equaling $124,100 or $850 per residential unit, whichever is greater, plus a 2.5% annual increase. I believe this is a new approach that they're taking, again, to try to begin weaning some of the existing abatements that have been used over in the area. I think it's similar to the project that was done with the hotel, is it not, Jonathan? The hotel in 20...
So it's tax assurance.
Mm-hmm.
Further, please, yeah.
Alderman Cone.
Alderman, were you more involved with the kind of structure of this arrangement, or no?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
Based on the resolution, I thought the idea was to get the alderman out of the process and make it more objective, and as a result of that, I have been advising my developers to
Go to SLDC directly.
meet with the neighborhood group for issues regarding design and, zoning and issues along those lines, and I've been advising them to go to SLDC for discussions of all the incentives. I have largely tried to extradite or remove myself from those discussions to the best of my ability. And I am willing to swear on a stack of Bibles, I would hope Jonathan would, that I have not contacted him in any way to try to influence his underwriting.
Thank you. I was just asking because this isn't a typical arrangement for us. So I'd like to understand and ask questions of whoever was involved with arranging this abatement. So actually, I've been on this committee off and on for a majority of my 10 years down here. I can't remember a time when we've actually arranged for pilots, which for those unfamiliar, payment in lieu of taxes.
Let me just say that it's very similar to another project a block or so away but that project is replacing an old apartment building, and therefore there was occupancy, so it went to the HUD's committee. And it's very similar to a hotel, which is now starting, and again, it went to the HUD's committee because it had
right.
occupancy, so
But
you're right. This is totally new.
Yeah, the hotel went to HUD.
Did it come to here?
No,
No, I guess not, so maybe it did come here, well, at any rate.
well, so for the payment in lieu of taxes, how was that structured? Who determined that? How was it determined?
So I determined it. It was determined by, essentially what we did was we tried to figure out, so we tried to figure out how much would be needed by the city essentially to be paying more per unit than sort of what would be the average taxes collected per residential unit in the area and in the city. I guess primarily in the city, not in that area. That area is pretty high, high taxes. So the reason for doing it this way as opposed to just doing like say a 70% or 80% tax abatement is it gives the developer a little bit more certainty knowing exactly what their tax bill is going to be per year. And that was, given the lower rate of return on this one, that was necessary in order for them to get their bank financing lined up.
So this is a higher rate of return than the project that we just discussed with the old school building. I'm assuming that, at least based off of the board bill summary here, that part of the reason that we're arranging the pilots is because this was on a parking lot, or part of the land or site was a parking lot and therefore assessed at a lower value than other parts of the neighborhood?
Well, correct, because there's no only the parking improvements are on it. So, right, so the current taxes are extremely low. So giving 100% tax abatement would lock in basically almost no revenue.
No revenue for the city.
For 10 years, right.
Right.
So, so the way we structured this, based on the size of the units and whatnot, it was really structured just sort of like an amount of tax per square foot of residential living space, and then so we modeled it that way, and it came out to about per unit, I think about $850 per unit is what's going to be paid. So, so it still amounts to a fairly significant amount of revenue, particularly compared to obviously the parking lot that's there now. The other thing that so we've got another dashboard that we've created, and we didn't have it for this project because it's very new, but we do have in the bottom right box, this sort of, it gives you this, it says years to break even from project completion. What we're trying to convey with that information is how long you would have to wait for a project that would not require incentives that would generate revenue at the neighborhood level in order to sort of be, until the city would be worse off, right? So, for example, if it said 10 years, then that means the city could wait 10 years for a project to come in that would generate the neighborhood average level and still be better off as long as it comes in within 10 years. What this is showing is that based on the amount of revenue that this is going to kick off to the city would have about 1 year until we would be worse off. So we would have to get a project without abatement within a year in order for this to, not make sense.
Okay, I'm not sure if that's the clearest tool to be using. I mean, the way that seems to read is that the project itself would be breaking even next year. I mean, if I just, without your explanation, was looking at that on paper, I mean, it looks as though that's...
Yeah, so that's, the dashboard is more clear. This was just sort of something we've had in there for a while.
Just a point of clarification and feedback,
Thank you,
for
I appreciate that.
So with the arrangement of the pilots, I don't have it in front of me, I think it's $124,000 a year in pilots, yeah. is that just for the city, or does that go to, is that split out between all of the other taxing districts, the library, the zoo museum district, the school district?
That would be split out. So that's the total for 124.
Okay, so once that's split out, the city gets roughly, if I recall correctly, about
About 19%.
20%.
Yeah.
So the 20% of that 124,000 that we would be receiving, does that essentially cover the city's cost for services per square foot or per resident or per unit?
It does. Yeah, and that's what's reflected in that project grade that gets at the 4.75. So it covers the city's services and not only the services that are required by that site, but as we've discussed about the model before, is the model takes costs from around the city and applies them to properties based on what their potential should be. And so it basically, what that means is it's carrying its weight. It's not just covering itself, but it's covering more than itself.
That 2.5% annual increase, though, how, the area around that has obviously experienced a larger increase than 2.5%.
Correct.
So how did you come to the 2.5%?
Again, it was, that was a point of negotiation. We tried to push for 4, and their bank wasn't having it at 4, so we had to go to 2.5.
Is there a letter from the bank that says as much?
No, it was more verbal than a letter, but we could probably get one.
What is the annual percentage increase for the regular taxpayer in that area?
So, I mean, obviously, it's going to vary. Also, the way that the...
On average, though, what would you say?
I'm not 100% sure. I would say it's probably between 3 and 4 on average annually. I mean, that's pretty significant over 10 years. The other thing is, most of the time people's like reassessment is like on a 6-year cycle or whatever, so that's why you get like the big bumps. So like Tower Grove South, for example.
Yeah, Tower Grove South and Holly Hills have experienced some pretty significant increases.
Right, they were on it was their turn in the cycle this last year, so they were getting basically 6 years of bump all at once. That's the way I understand it from talking to the assessor's office.
So had this not been a parking lot, how, I mean, that's really going to be a hypothetical then. Okay, I don't have any other questions. Thank you, Jonathan.
Sure, thank you.
Alderman Narayan.
I think Alderman Cohn there asked most of what I was going to ask, so thank you.
Alderman Todd.
I don't have any questions.
Okay, so as with the other bill, we'll just keep these to another time so we can have some more discussion on it. So Board Bill 162.
Board Bill 162 is, let me get these out. Begin at the, this is actually on the far southern end of the ward, 17th Ward, and it is a acquisition for a site that has been vacant for a number of years. It has environmental problems. It was, what was it before? I think a foundry or something. And it is proposed for a $34 million renovation. And the Bar K is going to be one of the tenants in this space, and I believe they have other commercial space there. The developer is here. We can go through and discuss it in more detail. I see Brian Pratt, if it's all right with the chair, perhaps Brian can come forward and discuss.
State your name for us, sir.
Brian Pratt, Green Street, St. Louis. Good morning. This is actually 2 buildings at the on McCree near the Van Deventer intersection. One building has been vacant for quite some time. It was the former ramming building on McCree. The other building is the former Cardinal Supply. We acquired the buildings earlier this year and have been working on redevelopment plans for the projects. In each case, we'll have retail and destination entertainment venues incorporated, as well as an office component. The retail venues, one that was referred to as a dog bar / park concept would be new to St. Louis. They have generally a draw area of close to 45 miles, so they bring people in from a fairly wide berth. It's a unique concept we think fits in well with kind of the city's desire to attract more people and import dollars into the city. And the location fits very well because there's a high parking count, and the property is well buffered by rail and roads adjacent and other industrial adjacent uses. We have some interest in the office space and continue to pursue that. The ramming building, which is the building to the west, we're working with 2 to 3 potential possibility for adaptive reuse of that building, or at least partial reuse, potential to scrape it. It does have some environmental problems, so we're weighing the end user requirements and whether or not the building will suit their purposes. If you're familiar with our firm, we generally try to adaptive reuse if at all possible before tearing a building down. So that's our initial preference, just to keep at least a portion of the building, but we'll have to see if we can save it or not. With that, happy to ask any questions, comments.
We get to ask the questions, you get to answer them. Thanks, Brian. So the chairwoman had to step out for a moment. She asked me to take over as vice chair. I have my own questions, so I'll just dive into those. And I'm actually going to ask the folks from SLDC, but if you could remain at the dais, that would be appreciated. I do want to just take a moment and commend Green Street. You do really wonderful work all over the city. And it's great to see some of the work that you've done along Shodo and North Riverfront and other places, so I very much want to make note of that.
I did this one.
Great. Do you want to just introduce yourself for?
Matt Bauer, SLDC.
Sorry, I'm not sure if you were up at the dais earlier, Matt, or not.
Briefly.
So I'm looking at the analysis here, and at the top where it says project 10-year return rate, it seems to be the same with or without incentives.
Right, I was going to bring that up. So
So-
this is a triple net lease, so the taxes, the taxes pass through to the tenant. So this really would help attract the tenant and be a benefit to the tenant as opposed to the developer directly.
So
Triple net lease is where the tenant will pay pretty much all of expenses associated with the space.
So I understand that, but I'm just, if we're in a situation where we're trying to preserve revenue to the city, and we're in an area where there's the ability to create investment without providing incentive, and that incentive, did I understand correctly that you don't have a tenant currently identified, or?
So we have multiple tenants. We have 2 under a letter of intent. We don't have a lease signed, but the modeling performed by SLDC is predicated on those prospects. So very heavy sales tax component to 2 of our prospective tenants, and then an office component, which would also bring earnings tax. So those are some other potential sources beyond the real property tax.
Right, if we just look at the 10 years, even during the incentive period, and then the net benefit to the city itself is just over $1 million, in similar to the school district. And that includes the incentives provided.
So we're looking at a SID and TDD, or just a SID?
So on the Bar K project, there is no SID that's why we kind of split this into two separate analysis, because one of the sites would have a SID TDD component to it that we have modeled, but that's, the developer is pursuing that through the SID TDD process. But we've included the projected revenues as part of the analysis. So the Bar K project does not include a SID TDD, but the other project would incorporate SID and TDD revenue, and that's shown in the sources.
So, but we're passing both of these out, or the desire is to pass both of these out of committee?
Correct, under a single abatement area.
So is the SID being taken up in HUDs then?
Yeah.
Is it, wait, okay.
Yeah,
We have not filed the petition for the SID yet, so I would anticipate that would be spring of next year.
Okay, and that'll obviously be a single site SID, which of course our state auditor has just released a fairly scathing report about single site SIDs. What portion of the project is being covered by the SID then? 'Cause, I mean, this is projecting $1.2 million in SID revenue.
It would be just the west property, which is the former ramming facility, the 4951 building, which is
Okay.
in a pretty extreme state of dilapidation. That's the building we're
That's
still
the
trying
building
to
that's
determine.
like off to the
Yeah, it has,
rear and
unfortunately,
side.
currently has graffiti on it,
Yeah.
but it's the building to the west of the Cardinal building. Been vacant for in excess of 10, 15 years.
That, to the west, so that's the one that's actually on McCree, or like it has a frontage along McCree.
Neither of them sit really direct. They both sit a little further back.
Right, but, I mean, you have the, Luth Brothers and then the City
Brothers.
Water Division.
That's right. So immediately
across
across
the
the street is Cardinal, which is a two-story. This is the
Right.
one-story, the
That's
smaller,
behind
squattier
it.
building.
I mean, behind it, but,
I'll
yeah,
take it.
okay.
And there's some environmental concerns there too. So part of the subsidy in that instance is to help us remediate those.
Yeah, so that was actually, I don't see brownfields on here at all. Are you planning to apply for brownfields for remediation, or?
We are not.
Okay.
We have on other projects, but in this case,
So, and then the Bar K has 1.9 million in new market tax credits. How is that possible with a dog park restaurant brewery? I've been told repeatedly that, I mean, new markets are very challenging, very expensive to navigate. So a single site restaurant would probably not be the most, and particularly a dog park, I mean, that just doesn't seem to compute.
So let me clarify the Cardinal building, which is 4565. A portion of the building is the dog park. There's also 30,000 square feet of office space incorporated in the building. So we're going to take the current two-story building. We're going to build roughly two spaces. The rear will be the dog park. The front half of that building will be the office. So we're actually going to create a second-level mezzanine. If you're familiar with the sheet metal workers building, for example, and you've been on a tour of the training facility in the rear, we did a similar concept there where we took a two-story height industrial building and created more or less a two-story office. So I think some of the attraction of the new market tax credits is the fact that we're going to be bringing the office tenants to the project, not solely dependent on.
So I guess part of the reason I'm asking that question, so there's two phases, and at least on the sheet provided by SLDC, phase one is 4565 McCree, which has 150 jobs. So that's actually half as many jobs that's on phase two, but phase two is for the other parcel that doesn't have the new market tax credits.
That's correct.
So, I mean, generally with new market tax credits, I mean, job creation is a key driver for those tax credits, right? So,
Certainly a consideration, as is the timing of the projects.
yeah, okay. So the intent here then is to ensure project completion, but the tenant through the triple net lease is ultimately the one that would receive the benefit
Benefit of the tax.
of just the tax abatement.
Correct.
Actually,
Well, go ahead.
I mean, part of the new market tax credit is allowing us to provide some flexibility in the upfront lease rates of some of these tenants as well. So in addition to the tax abatement flowing through directly to the tenant, so they have lower overall occupancy costs between our lease rate, tax costs, et cetera, that the new market tax credits have allowed us to structure the leases in such a way that we can provide some relief in the early year and get them up to a market rent.
So what would the lease rates be then per square foot for that area?
On the office component of this, we're in the $20 to $22 a square foot. I don't recall exactly what.
And that's with the
That would be before the triple nets.
Okay, and then after?
That's probably another, at this building, it's another $450. So they're going to be in the mid-20s versus, by comparison, immediately to the north in the, Cortex, you're probably in the, you're averaging around 30 plus, and downtown ranges between $20 to $30, depending on the class of building.
Right. So it's actually, I mean, it's higher than downtown, essentially, I mean, or on par with downtown. Okay. I don't have any further questions.
Alderman Orion.
Thank you. So, like my colleague Alderman Cohn, I have some, I guess, concerns that the 10-year rate of return with no incentives is the same as with incentives. Could you explain that to me a little bit more?
I mean, the tax benefit, in a typical project, let's say an apartment building, the tax incentive would go directly to the developer as they determine their rate, rental rates. In a retail scenario is a triple net rent where all the expenses, usually including the property taxes, would pass through to the tenant to pay all expenses related to the space. So in this sense, if we give a tax abatement to the developer to get the project done, it would be passed through. The benefit would be passed through to the tenant. I mean, in some ways, it's very similar to if you think about a single-family home tax abatement. The developer is not benefiting directly from the tax abatement. They're able to advertise that tax abatement and attract a buyer for the home more easily because the buyer is the one that doesn't have to pay the full amount of property taxes once they purchase the house. So it's kind of similar to that. I mean, I think if we're going to be looking at this again at the next meeting, we can certainly kind of give both scenarios, like what it would look like, and if it was what that difference in return would be if it was passed through. I mean, if it was taken on by the developer, but if you would find that to be helpful. But the explanation of what is here now is just, it reflects that it passes through to the tenant and allows them to attract, more easily attract a tenant or attract a more attractive tenant.
I do believe that would be helpful. So essentially this, if I understand correctly, these abatements would flow all the way through to Bar K and then to whichever tenants happen to lease over at 4591.
Correct.
All right, well, I have nothing further. Thank you.
I guess one nuance,
absolutely,
I mean,
absolutely.
If you think about it, the developer doesn't get a return on capital on taxes paid, right? The tenant is, and therefore the IRR calculation in this model, because the tax benefit is being passed through, there's no return to calculate for the developer, the impact on the return of the developer. So.
Sure. No, I got it. This is just the first time that I've seen one where it was the same on 10 years.
Alderman Todd. I don't have any questions, just a comment. I think it's a good project. I have friends that live in that area off of McCree, and just to see that neighborhood undergo its transformation is amazing. And as always, look, if you're trying to do something in North St. Louis, the Fifth Ward is open for business. I welcome all type of development in my ward. So thank you for that. And I guess we'll hold another hearing real soon to hear these bills. And then I have a bill as well to do. So we'll hear Board Bill 163. Thank you. And Vice Chair handle this while I present this bill. Here's some handouts.
Okay.
Ooh, my cheat sheet.
Take up Board Bill number 163. Alderwoman Tamika Hubbard.
Not the big deal you said I was, Shane. Trouble with that nameplate. Yes, I'm here on behalf of Board Bill 163. It's 2127 North 11th Street. There are some handouts floating around. The developer is Louis McKinney. It's a redevelopment of an old school in our ward in the Old North St. Louis neighborhood. Acquisition cost $425,000. Construction cost $8.1 million. It's a renovation of the old Webster School. It'll be 49 two-bedroom units, 68 parking spots. It's definitely a good thing to see happening in my ward. We have a lot of schools who need a lot of help. One being the car school as well, that we've been literally for the last 20 years trying to get somebody to develop it. So this type of stuff is huge for my neighborhood. The board bill just seeks to approve a Chapter 99 redevelopment plan and blighting study for this project. It will allow for up to 15 years of tax abatement, 10 years of tax full abatement, followed by 5 years of tax abatement based on 50% of the assessed value of incremental improvements. And I would like your favorable support, and I'll take any questions. The developer will also, he plans to use LIHTC and private funds for this project. They've done projects in Alderwoman Boyd's ward, so he's an experienced developer, and he has done projects, successful projects, affordable housing and other developments throughout the city, and has been around a long time. So I'll take any questions you may have.
Thank you, Alderwoman. I don't have the roll call sheet. Thank you. Go ahead and take questions from the committee. Alderman, well, yeah, okay. Alderman Narayan.
Thank you. So just a couple of questions here. These 49 two-bedroom units, what is the rent looking like on those? Do you know?
Since they're applying for LIHTC, it'll all be affordable.
It'll all be affordable housing. Mm-hmm. And then I'm not familiar with kind of the parking situation right there. In your estimation, is 68 spots appropriate for 49 two-bedroom units? Is that going to work?
I have no clue, but I know that they go through zoning and they don't just pop these numbers out their head. So they look at the square footage of the building and see how many spaces they need. So I'm pretty sure they've done their due diligence on that part of it.
Okay, yeah, that's the only thing that kind of popped up as any concern for me, and that's really in the weeds. I know how hard it is to get these old schools moving. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Alderman Todd. No, I don't have a question. Okay. I know firsthand how difficult it is to try and redevelop these old school buildings. So when developers come forward and have a plan that aligns with the vision of our neighborhood and community, it's a good thing. So when it looks like they're actually spending a pretty decent amount of money on a 68,000 square foot project. So I'll entertain a motion that we pass Board Bill 163 out of committee.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Any call for previous roll? No?
Previous roll.
Is there an objection to previous roll? I don't hear an objection to previous roll. Board Bill number 163 passes out of committee with a due pass recommendation.
Thank you. And we have some minutes to approve from the last meeting, which was way back when in June. I can't even recall the date. June 18th, so I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the June 18th meeting.
I make a motion that we approve the minutes for the June 18th meeting.
Second, previous roll.
Hearing no objection to previous roll, minutes are approved, and this concludes our neighborhood development committee hearing, and we will definitely be back sometime soon to revisit those bills.
Any thought as to when you'd like to have another meeting? I mean, for those that we're holding, we don't have to go through an advertising process again. So
I'm open whenever we can get everybody together and make sure that we at least have a full committee. I didn't realize it was only this small number of people on this committee. I thought it was more people, but if I know Beth, she had an excused, and I haven't talked to Brandon, but when we can get everybody here, it would be good to have it.
so sometime the early part of January.
Right, Tuesdays, 9 o'clock work for me.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
All righty, thank you all.